is mobile for development? Why are we all here? What's the opportunity? And what are the challenges? If I can work the clicker. To the right. Oh dear. Oh, there we go. Lovely. So whatever M4D is, it's growing. And whoever's interested in it, and you can see there are a lot of stakeholders that are, they're investing and they care about it. So let me tell you a little bit about what this means to the GSMA and why we're interested in it. In emerging markets, there are two groups for whom there are issues that could be addressed. First, mobile network operators, and the second, underserved or base of the pyramid populations. Now, as you know, at the GSMA, we represent the interests of the global mobile phone industry. So everything we do, all our activities, support the health and the growth of that industry. And in emerging markets, the situation for operators is very interesting. You've got the number of subscribers growing. The number of people getting connected is increasing. At the same time, as you can see from the blue line on the graph, the average revenue per user, the ARPU, is declining. Now, at the moment, because there are still so many people unconnected in emerging markets, this isn't having too much of an impact. It's definitely an issue that's recognized, but it's not too much of a problem as yet. However, there's a gap here that could be addressed. And if we can increase the average revenue per user, as well as increasing the number of users, then this will support the growth of the industry and the health of that industry. At the same time, base of the pyramid users in emerging markets, there are large swathes of them without access to basic services, such as banking, electricity, sanitation, education, health, as touched on by Fernando in detail. At the same time, there is a much greater proportion of this set of people who do have access to or own a mobile phone. So lacking access to basic services, do have access to a mobile phone. And herein lies the opportunity. Through the mobile phone, we have a channel to deliver access to basic services that millions of people across developing markets need to improve their lives. And if we can offer these services through the mobile phone, they will probably use their mobile phone just a little bit more. And this will obviously have beneficial impacts for the operators. The average revenue per user will increase a tiny amount. And this means that although this is, this small amount on an individual level, across the millions of people in the subscriber bases, this is significant for revenues. It's significant for revenues at the same time as enabling operators to provide basic services to improve people's lives, to help them save money for their daughter's wedding, to help them light their homes so their children can study, to help them wash their clothes, whatever it is. And at the same time, it's not just a revenue opportunity for operators, it's also a means of attracting new subscribers. So whereas communication is an attractive reason to get a mobile phone, if you can also bank, get access to electricity, sanitation, etc. through your mobile phone, it's an even more attractive proposition as a user. It's also a means for operators to increase customer loyalty, because if you're accessing those services through your mobile phone, you're less likely to swap to another operator who doesn't deliver that access through their services. And so for us at the GSMA, mobile for development refers to our work with our mobile operator members and also the international development community, social enterprises and investors, which drives commercial mobile services for the underserved people in emerging markets. And that's great. What are we doing about it? As many of you know, in the GSMA we have many vertical targeted programs, so a program looking specifically at the impact of mobile on health or the impact of mobile on education, disaster response, etc. We also look at the space horizontally as a whole, and this is what Mobile for Development Intelligence focuses on. So MDI is a central resource for data and insights, which informs investment and design decisions in mobile and supports the digital empowerment of people in emerging markets. Now, back in 2012, when we launched MDI, it was quite special because for the first time, the GSMA made a subset of its paid for market intelligence, which it offered its subscription fee-paying members. It offered it completely free because we realized there was an opportunity to help those who were developing mobile services which delivered development impacts. They could use that data for good. So we made this data available. At the same time, we began tracking what was being done in M4D. We began tracking the number of products and services that were being implemented across developing markets to give them more visibility so that someone in Tanzania could see what someone in India was doing, learn from them, and share best practice. And we launched this data and information, and the community responded really positively. Yes, data, great. Yes, numbers, give us more. At the same time, what does it all mean? So we responded to this by producing a series of research and analysis pieces, and that's something that we're focusing on very heavily as we move forward into the future. So we provide data, analysis, and research. At the same time, we're a community. We are a diverse group of stakeholders, and you can see this. There are many people interested in MDI and therefore mobile for development. We've got operators, donors, internet players, media organizations. They're represented in our user base online, and they're also represented here in this room. And what are we doing all this for? We're aiming to drive partnerships with the view to creating scale. And scale is really important to everybody in this room because whether your aim is to increase the number of users in your subscriber base or increase your market share, or if as an NGO you want to increase the number of people you reach with your development information for the same amount of money, whatever it is, you're aiming to increase the number of people that you reach. And this is why scale is so important for mobile for development. And what MDI aims to do is to understand the needs and interests of all these different stakeholders, to understand that on one side you've got the mobile industry with trillions of dollars to invest. On the other side you've got the development community with billions of dollars to invest. And at the same time you've got these startups, nimble entrepreneurs, the innovators who are experimenting, who are creating new business models, experimenting with new ways of working with each other. And what we aim to do is understand what everybody is doing, understand the best practice that is emerging from these new projects, feed it back to the mobile industry, feed it back to the development community to inform their investment decisions so that they can put their significant funds into funding good business models that will work, that will scale, and that will drive the benefits for more and more people. But with this diverse group of people comes a diverse group of stakeholders. And this is, a diverse group of stakeholders with diverse motivations. And this is what we're going to be discussing today. So I'd like to invite my panelists up to the stage, please. And with us today, we have Michael D'Souza from Dialog. We have Priya Jaisinghani from USAID, and Brooke Partridge from Vital Wave. Now, this group of stakeholders is important because our panelists today represent different groups within M4D. We've got Michael D'Souza. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name as I introduced you. Michael D'Souza represents the operator perspective. We have Priya representing the government donor agency perspective, and Brooke, through her consultancy Vital Wave, works with corporates, governments and NGOs, and today we'll be taking the NGO perspective. Now, shortly I'll ask my panelists to introduce themselves, their organisations and their reasons for getting involved in M4D, but I just wanted to let you know we'll be opening the panel up to the floor to questions very soon. So if you want to get yours in early, please let Laura and Mary know early on. So Michael, would you like to kick us off? Why is Dialog interested in mobile for development?
Sure, thank you, Julia. I think Dialog's association with development dates back to the days when it was launched as a, sort of the fourth entrant to the Sri Lankan market in 1995. Being the fourth entrant, we were entering what we call a red ocean. There was hyper competition even back then. And the key differentiator for the fourth operator, being Dialog, was to look at the market not as an exclusive market, but as an inclusive market. At the time, Sri Lanka was sized to be about 200 to 300,000 viable subscribers. Dialog saw the market as about 20 million. And the difference being that we saw the entire population as a potential subscriber base. So while mobile for development perhaps is coming of age, as it were, the relevance of mobile for development dates back possibly about 15, 18 years. When Dialog entered the market, it looked at a model that's quite unique in the sense that it looked at the 4 A's, a model that we've internalized in the company. The 4 A's stand for affordability, availability, applicability, and affinity. Affordability is perhaps the easiest to overcome. This gave rise to sachet, pay-as-you-go, pay per minute, pay per second, innovations at the time which were talked about and helped scale mobile across most emerging markets, where people prefer to pay as they go. Then came availability. How do you convince boardrooms to invest in markets or in rural areas where your ROI is going to be very hard to prove in terms of a payback period? Thirdly, availability, applicability is the relevance of the content or the services that you provide in these areas. In many cases, Google has little relevance to a farmer in rural Sri Lanka, unless, of course, you can translate that into an informed decision that the farmer, for example, can take or make. And that relevance comes with the whole applicability around the ecosystems that the content providers bring to the table. The fourth, and perhaps the most challenging, is affinity. How do we understand the needs of a community that's so divorced perhaps from a typical MNO? How do we correspond? How do we leverage off existing ecosystems and overcome existing ecosystems? Is not business as usual for a telco. And this affinity creation is something that we've grappled with throughout since 1995 to date. And we've innovated quite a bit around this space. We've created what we call social intermediaries, if you like, information intermediaries who carry information to the community. To resonate what you said, Fernando, is to build capacity, to build the skills within the ecosystem so that once you've created availability, you've overcome affordability, and you've got applicable services, you've also created the skills, the capacity at the grassroots level to absorb this and to sort of adopt these technologies. In many ways, Dialog has structured its organization as well to deliver these 4 A's. So we've got, not to get too hung up over a word, but let's say, for example, we initially started off as CSR. We then went on to become CR. We dropped the S from it so that we could become more holistic. And then we went to what we call sustainability. And now we call ourselves inclusive business. While all these 4 functions still exist at different levels of maturity, the sustainability and inclusive business team within the organization have a creative license to play with the 4 A's, if you like. There's a risk appetite within the organization that gives the sustainability team to go out and create, incubate, and to experiment, if you like, across these 4 A's. In many cases, once the proof of concept is delivered, it gets pulled back into the mainstream business and it gets embedded either in distribution, either in product innovation, in the VAS team, it could be in the core engineering team, in the marketing team. It becomes institutionalized as part of core business. And we've got many examples across the years that have demonstrated that this model really works very well. To sum up very quickly, our motivation to get into this space is fueled by necessity. We had to look at the market quite differently. We had to look at it as a blue ocean when we entered the market. And that's helped the organization to develop a competency, if you like, in looking at mobile for development as a differentiator. But we also very quickly realized that for economic development, inclusion becomes a fundamental tenet. Connectivity is a fundamental driver of inclusion, and wireless connectivity is a particularly inclusive rendition of connectivity. So if you start connecting the dots, as it were, we play a fundamental role in becoming a catalyst for the Sri Lankan market. It also breeds competition. When we started differentiating ourselves, the competition started mimicking what we did. So you've got this knock-on effect in terms of scale within a very small country, but arguably in a very effective manner. Dialog, again, going back to 2001, 2, and 3, the GSMA, even at that time, had in the GSM World Awards an award dedicated for GSM in the community. I'm not sure how many of you can recall that. Dialog won the first 3 awards primarily because it was in that space, it was working in that space quite significantly. So in 2001, in 2002, and 2003, the organization was recognized for the work that it did in this space in terms of pioneering some of the thinking around inclusive telecommunications in markets.
Thank you. Priya, would you be able to outline why USAID is interested in M4D?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Priya Jaisinghani. I'm with USAID. I think probably most of you know that USAID is the foreign assistance arm of the U.S. government. We were started 53 years ago, and we spend about $20 billion a year on agriculture programs, health programs, efforts to support communities who are devastated by emergency situations like in the Philippines today and so forth. We're operating in over 100 countries. And I think it's worth reflecting a little bit about USAID's history, because when we were founded in 1960 by President Kennedy, overseas development assistance represented over 70% of capital flows to emerging markets, to developing countries. So, USAID was a major player on the continent of Africa in terms of representing dominant capital flows into the continent. Today, we are now 13% of capital flows into developing countries. And that represents a major shift and necessitates donors operating very, very differently. We're not the biggest game in town in terms of new capital flows into the continent. And it's because of that that USAID has, over the past decade or so, really changed its views on partnerships. And I was really pleased last night at dinner to be talking to Microsoft and Orange and Invested Development and others who said that they've really seen great ways in which USAID is partnering with them, and that's exciting. There are lots of companies that we've forged partnerships with, Coca-Cola and Unilever, these companies that have massive reach and distribution into some of the most vulnerable communities in the world. And operators just like them have, you can go into some of the most remote villages and there's a handful of things you'll see. You'll see the sachet sizes of shampoo, you'll see Coca-Cola, and you'll see, obviously, airtime scratch card vendors all over the place. So it's very exciting to partner with organizations that have such reach and distribution and are motivated to serve communities, no matter how poor, no matter how remote, because that's just the business model that's required for large-scale, low-volume businesses, low-margin businesses. But what's really exciting about the mobile space for us is not just the reach of distribution, it's also just the nature of the device. This is a two-way dialogue all of a sudden that we can see or have with families who have so long been out of the conversation about what is development, what are their needs, what are their wants, and so forth. So we're very excited about about the M4D opportunity. As a result of kind of the enthusiasm, USAID was the first donor to create a specific team focused on mobile solutions. We've got about 15 people in Washington, maybe people who focus on M in agriculture, M in health, M access initiatives, all sorts of exciting programs going on. We were recognized earlier this year by GSMA. But I guess I would, in reflecting on the enthusiasm of the donor community, I still come from a position that great work is going on. I think there are compelling partnerships emerging, and yet there's this very real sense that partnerships are hard, that there aren't thousands of examples of scaled M4D programs, and that there are many hurdles yet to be overcome if we are really going to take advantage of the opportunity that we see. So I commend GSMA for doing this first combined M4D effort to get us out of our verticals and thinking about what it takes to really create an industry to move beyond a set of projects into something that is much more professionalized, seamless, where partnerships are easier to create, where evidence of impact is really understood across a variety of partners. And I'm just delighted to be part of this conversation, so thanks.
Brooke, would you like to introduce your organisation and why you're interested in M4D?
Sure. I'm Brooke Partridge. I'm the CEO of Vital Wave, and we launched 8 years ago for the express purpose of scaling business and programs in emerging markets. And today, just about every project we do has a mobile solutions component to it. Mobiles for Development, I think we're all familiar, is the end-to-end delivery of mobile solutions for socioeconomic benefit. But we need to be sure that every player, every stakeholder in the ecosystem that helps implement these projects benefits as well, whether it's for-profit or government or nonprofit. I'm here today talking about nonprofits, or to represent the nonprofit hat, and my main message really is about the fact that nonprofits need to act more like businesses, and businesses need to think more like nonprofits when it comes to empathy and making it sustainable. As an organization, we orchestrate across all phases and functions of mobile solutions and the ecosystem that supports them, but probably our most unique value add is looking at the business of mobile solutions and M4D, and we find that to be critical, especially for maximizing its impact. So in preparing for the panel, we talked a lot about success stories and scaling, success stories of scale, and there aren't a ton yet. There aren't a whole lot. But there are some really important emerging best practices, so I took on the task of sharing a couple of, we think, the most key best practices for M4D, and have formulated them in a mnemonic device using the word mobile, so we can remember throughout the next couple of days if you like. The first M is multidisciplinary. M4D requires implementers have a wealth of skills, so many skills that it's almost impossible to have them in one organization, so that makes partnership incredibly important, especially for NGOs that were not necessarily created to have that many disciplines within one organization. You can't do this alone. O is for open. The field is moving towards open standards, open source, open data, and this leads to innovation, which is great. Not everyone in the ecosystem has incentives to be open, so we need to come together and have those discussions to make sure that that being open has the most benefit for the field at large. B is for business-oriented. There is money here, and that's good. It's good for nonprofits as well as for the private sector and for governments, because when market forces pick up M4D, it's going to make the building blocks more affordable and more accessible. It's going to be easier to focus on the needs in development as opposed to the mechanisms for mobile solutions. But that requires looking at business models, and also, as I said before, NGOs need to start thinking more on the business side of things. I is for industry agnostic. M4D is happening across all industry verticals, and I echo Priya's comments about how wonderful it is. Oh, apparently I'm not on, and I don't know how to turn it on. Can you help me? Oh, hi. Okay. Industry agnostic. As I said, M4D is happening across industries. It's wonderful that we're having this conversation. There are a lot of conversations, both public and private, that are happening about the need to be looking across those industries. Best practices, the benefit here is to learn from one another. And again, it points back to the need for being able to partner across verticals that have normally operated in silos. So that's a bit of discomfort that the vertical industries are having in terms of beginning to talk to one another more. And a similar best practice is leverage. M4D needs leverage by offering services across different verticals or across organizations, but using the same platform or using a single footprint. And this was what helps create economies of scale and lower costs. And then finally, and I'm not going to elaborate on this because Michael's going to in a little bit, but ecosystem, E in mobile is for ecosystem. And all technology applications require ecosystem. Fernando spoke about it in his talk as well. Microsoft spends a lot of time investing in their ecosystem across emerging markets. And it's key for M4D as well. So quick recap. The most important characteristics and best practices for M4D, just remember mobile, multidisciplinary, open, business-oriented, industry agnostic, leveraged, and ecosystem.
Thank you. And just before we open the floor, I've got a couple of questions for the panel before we get to yours. Priya, you touched on the importance of partnerships with the private sector, and Brooke, you've emphasised the cross-disciplinary nature, the need to learn from different people implementing these projects. Michael, I'd just like to ask you, how important are partnerships from your perspective as an operator? And can you give any examples of some unexpectedly successful partnerships in M4D?
Yeah, I think I'll also try and clarify in terms of when you talk of partnerships. I think we also need to look at development as a need. For example, development exists to a great extent because of market failure. And market failure to a great extent is not by default, it's by design. And in our experience, when we've tried to work in ecosystems and in partnerships, you're invariably trying to either create a substitute of an ecosystem to one that already exists that creates that market failure or perpetuates that market failure. For example, if you take agriculture in Sri Lanka, we've tried to work with providing farmers with price information where there's arbitrage in terms of the market price information that reaches the farmer. Now, that arbitrage exists because of cartels that exist in terms of how the price information is collected and then disseminated back to the farmers. When you try to create partnerships that go against what's already an existing ecosystem, again, you come across a challenge that's not very easily solved by the technology, but it's more an issue of the partnership and the strength of the partnership that you can establish. This takes time. It also takes a lot of resolve and a lot of tactical work in terms of how you work with existing ecosystems. In some cases, M4D enables an existing ecosystem to be more efficient. And the partnerships around that is much easier because the benefits are, to a great extent, across the existing value chain. Mm-hmm. But when you try to create a substitute for an existing value chain, that to a great extent is inefficient in terms of the market dynamics or the forces of markets at that point in time. You come across many forces that are quite difficult to scale. You need political will, you need a lot of organizational capacity, and a lot of innovation as well. One quick example in how we overcame this particular challenge in terms of getting price information to farmers was to use our retail network, as I said earlier, as social entrepreneurs. So we worked with the World Bank at the time, and we created skills that our retailers who were your typical corner store in a rural village, we trained them for 4 years continuously in order that we gave them the skills, the business sense, as well as the tools that made them go out into the community and talk about how the information that was being delivered to a farmer's handset could be interpreted and then translated into an informed decision. It also took effort in terms of breaking the dependency of the farmer on the intermediary who was either giving him a loan to purchase the fertilizer for his produce, So on multiple scales, there was an advocacy role being played by our own retailer. The technology was being developed to become more intuitive for the farmer. So there is, on many levels, sort of dissecting ecosystems here. And it's a very difficult challenge to, I think, understand the role of an MNO without bringing in the wider partners and the wider ecosystem. And to a great extent, the government, the regulators, community-based organizations, NGOs, donors, they all contribute to the bigger picture. And I think it's the role of, and perhaps in our case, our role, we see our role as an integrator of all of these various stakeholders and working through that whole ecosystem, if you like, and setting something up that's sustainable in the long run.
Can I just add on to that? I think it's a great point. So often we think about M4D as being, a product that's delivered to people or to intermediaries like community health workers. And I think in terms of painting that bigger picture, it's so important that we come together and talk about what this digital future looks like, because it's not the role of the MNO to develop the products and then fight all the vested interests. At the end of the day, technologies so often are introducing transparency and efficiencies that are going to go against some, so there are going to be some losers in this space. When we talk about e-payments, there are people who would prefer a cash economy for lots of, reasons of their own. If you talk about the price information, there are a lot of people who don't want the farmers to have price information. And so, I think there is a real role in terms of painting that larger picture, and therefore, bringing this constellation of actors together to develop the products, but also build the political will and the advocacy efforts and, all the other things that need to go along to break the, what did you call it this morning, the offline ecosystem that we're often battling?
Sure, I think we speak of taking the offline world to an online world, sometimes forgetting that the offline world has existing ecosystems that makes it tick, as it were. So.
Right. And so often it can be the mobile operator that can provide the connectivity to these offline ecosystems, but at the same time negotiating these issues between the different groups. Brooke, would you be able to tell us a little bit from your work that you've done with these various groups, what some of the challenges are that you've seen in developing partnerships?
Yes, absolutely. I think a couple of really key issues, partnerships especially that happen across sectors, it's pretty easy to find groups, organizations that share the same first level goals and aspirations for a particular program or partnership. What often happens, especially when you have for-profits dealing with nonprofits dealing with government, is that there isn't really frank discussion about what your next level goals are. It's difficult for for-profit companies to be frank about the profit motive. It's common for governments or nonprofits to want to embrace a corporate partnership for the funding that can come, but with a certain amount of discomfort with that profit motive. And so partnerships can launch with this wonderful goal to accomplish the kinds of things that Fernando was talking about earlier, but with this undercurrent of tension that often doesn't even come up until you're well into the partnership itself and it's been launched and it's been publicized and you have to figure it out. And so really about, I think the key to partnership from our perspective in M4D is about being open and establishing the kind of trust that you need across the partnerships to be really frank about what everyone needs to accomplish. And not just at the organizational level, but at the level of the individuals who are in the program and how their own personal career success is measured. Understanding that helps to kind of pave the way to success.
And you mentioned measurement there. I know that's something Dialog is very interested in, and USAID. I wondered if, Michael, you could just speak a little bit to what you're looking at doing in terms of measuring success.
Success or failure. I think it boils down to you don't manage what you can't measure. And if we really are to be serious about investment into mobile for development at a boardroom level, you need to be able to convert some of the value that you create, which is intangible in many cases, or you don't have a metric around social value and environmental value created or destroyed, it becomes difficult to bring that to the boardroom and demonstrate the value that you create or the value that you deplete as a result of mobile for development. As an organization, I'm fortunate to work for Dialog because the leadership in the organization understands that we are in many ways charting sort of new waters in terms of mobile for development. And taking the offline world to an online world brings with it lots of risks as well as opportunity. And as a responsible sort of operator, the need for us to be able to understand what we are creating in terms of an online world is important for us to understand, and this is where the whole equation of value comes into play. If the purpose of business is to create value, we subscribe to the fact that in doing business, we create and also we destroy value. And if we are unable to capture the value that's destroyed, be that in the social space or in the environmental space, we just have two very simple metrics in business, revenue and profit. Perhaps in our case, it's EBITDA as well. But I think it needs to transcend that going forward, where we can also capture the value created and destroyed around social and environmental work that we either impact or create or destroy. And as a result, try and bring proxies in that corresponds or talks to the economic value that's created. We've just started discussions with the GSMA as well to see whether they'd be interested in working with us on this in this area, as it were. It's fuzzy. We all agree on that. But it's something that we feel very passionate about and strongly about, that we would like to understand the impact that's being created. Because if we can demonstrate at the boardroom the value that's being created from both social, environmental, as well as the economic value is far greater than just looking at the economic value created per se. The propensity for us to invest further, more aggressively into some of the ideas that comes out of mobile for development becomes all that more robust, and the business case becomes a lot stronger. So again, as I said, there is a creative license, if you like, within Dialog to explore some of these fuzzy concepts and hopefully bring clarity into some of this thinking.
And Priya, how fuzzy are these concepts for you and your work with USAID?
Yeah, I think it's mixed. I mean, to be really honest, I feel like there's kind of two camps of development professionals, some who are just perhaps overly enthusiastic around technology and, mobile everything is great. And then there's a lot of naysayers who, keep reminding me and certainly my team, technology isn't the silver bullet, and let's, calm down a little bit. And, you kind of get, one end of the spectrum or the other, and you don't get a lot of the in-between. So, I mean, I fully agree that if we had more robust evidence of the social and economic impact of M4D solutions, real case studies of what's not working, what to avoid, and what does work, and what to do more of, I think we could harness a lot more of the energy and resources of our agency and others like ours in this space. And it's not just a matter of funding, but also I think it's about really engaging much more at the policy level. Governments like the Swedes and the Brits and us and others, there are government-to-government dialogue where these issues just aren't coming to the top, and they won't until we feel much more confident that M4D solutions or some subset of them are really worth pushing in a much, much bigger way. So I fully advocate for more research, really neutral, objective research that can help steer us all in the right direction.
And at this point, I'd like to open to the floor for questions. Got Lara here with a microphone.
Hi, I'm Nick Dickinson from IRC, and I work in water and sanitation. And you've spoken about going from the offline world, let's say, to the online world, and with basic services or essential services, or in any way new services and new ecosystems. I've often found that maybe some of those services don't yet exist, and some of the change that has to happen has to happen in the offline world as well. And so, going, let's say, I think there's a big opportunity, maybe you can speak to that, for actually creating new services which perhaps don't exist in the offline world, but are being demanded there as well as in the online world. And have you thought about, let's say, that as well as, let's say, the other way? I don't know, maybe I've confused it a bit.
No, I think that speaks to innovation within these different organisations and the power of getting different groups together to highlight where there's a gap.
As well as leapfrogging, right? It speaks to the ability to leapfrog.
Well, and it's also, in my own work, let's say we work with governments, and so we're also looking at, for example, reforming institutions, which perhaps are currently playing an infrastructure role, let's say in a donor-driven economy, when they should really be a regulator and allow, let's say, the private sector to come in. So then, we're looking at something where the mobile economy could work together with other, I guess, sectors to really make big changes, I think.
Absolutely. I think, just to add to that, in Sri Lanka, we've started working on the education space, the online education space, if you like, and that's given rise to the government and the Ministry of Education looking at the entire pedagogy of offline education, as it were, because that's been dated, and we haven't had an overhaul of how we educate our children. So you're right. So I think some of it also brings in the question of, are we doing things correctly in the offline space before we even get to the online space?
Yeah, maybe I'll give the example of Uganda, because I think it's really exciting what's happening there in the education space. So the Ministry of Education is very motivated to use technology, but not for educating kids necessarily, but rather as a way to understand what's happening in schools that they're supporting. So there are 3 systems that have been deployed that are helping the Ministry of Education really get a sense of performance of schools. There's one called EduTrack, which is a way for students and parents to write in about what's happening in their schools. There's something called U-Report, which has hundreds of thousands of citizen reporters who are writing in about what's working or what's not working, or what's happening in their community. And then they have a series of auditors who are using FormHub to spot audit teacher attendance, school performance, and so on and so forth. So not any one of those systems, because it's self-reporting, can tell you exactly what's happening in any given school, but the 3 together help the Ministry of Education kind of triangulate and get a much clearer real-time understanding of the state of the school system, which is, I think, very exciting. So it talks about, I think that's maybe your point about trying to use technology to do better performance management of the offline services.
Just a quick example specific to water and sanitation. We have done a lot of research with municipalities and how they're using mobile to manage the cities better, and certainly some have implemented the process of being able to take a picture of a problem with the infrastructure and be able to send it to a particular location so that that can be attended to, whereas reporting was not really possible prior to that.
Any other questions?
So I actually wanted to take a point from all of the panelists, and starting with Brooks. So you give us a really nice, sobering lesson with partnerships, which is you need to kind of understand all the people involved down to their professional objectives and the roles they play within organizations. And of course, we also need to understand that 2 partners from different organizations have to have an aligned goal. And I thought it was quite interesting to see Priya and Michael talk about an aligned goal, which is trying to better clarify the impact of mobile for development services. So I was wondering if Priya and Michael could just talk to their own roles within their organizations a little bit and try and understand or make clearer to us what the partnership incentives are for the donors and the operators to come together and start working on the evaluation space in mobile for development, and what you think you can bring in your individual role to this kind of effort?
Okay. From Dialog's perspective, if I understood your question correctly, Adam, I see my role within the organization predominantly as an entrepreneur. We've played that role for quite some time now, which is to, you first start bringing people within the organization together before you even start looking outside the organization. That takes time. It starts from the boardroom, but it permeates right across the organization. Moving the debate from philanthropy to strategic to inclusive to core business takes time. That toughens you up quite a bit as well. You learn to take no quite often. You turn to take no on the chin, as it were. When you start looking at partnerships outside the organization, I can't emphasize enough the importance of having partners. We understand our business, but we don't understand the business as well as others do it as at the same time. So I think if you've got the donor agencies with you, if you've got the government with you, if you've got the community with you, and the linkage between the community and the organization, these partnerships, again, take a lot of time, a lot of trust to build over time. We've leveraged partnerships at many levels. So with the donors, we've worked with 2 or 3 very significant donors in Sri Lanka. And we've built a sense of trust and credibility with the donors. I think with that comes the ability for the donor to understand your intentions and your second-level goals and objectives as well. The same applies with the communities. I think when you go in, unless you see it through, a point I wanted to emphasize earlier on when presenting was there's a difference between delivering mobile for development sustainably and sustainable development. From an operator's perspective, I think you need to balance both. If you go in, have a very successful initiative, come out of that community, there's very little development that is sustainable in the long run. And I think it's partnerships that enable the second piece, which is sustainable development, comes not by playing this alone, but playing this collectively. And I think our role as an organization, the understanding that we have within the organization is that all these moving pieces, when it comes together, we deliver the longer term objective, which is either the national development as well as the organization's own sustainability.
So maybe just on the evaluation point again, I think it's great that we're aligned around the need for more of that, and I think we do have different roles. I think funders can support more research and should, because we're very woefully low on impact research in this space. And I think practitioners can do more to share their data that helps facilitate that research. And I think that there will be a discussion, I believe, around data, but that's, I think, a big sticky issue still today.
Next question. One here.
Hi there, I'm Dawn Haig-Thomas. I've been looking at the area of mobile for development for well over a decade now, and there's a number of recurring barriers that we keep hearing about. And so probably a more simple question to the panelists today. What do you see as the greatest barrier for mobile for development today? Is it taxation? Is it electricity? Is it coverage? Is it capital? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it government policy? I'd just be very interested in your views, because everyone in the room here wants to help move this on and find solutions. Where should we be focusing? What are the real pain points in your views?
I'm happy to speak to it, sure. It's business rigor. It's about understanding that this is for development, but in order for it to be successful, there need to be business models and really good operational management and optimization of performance and tracking and good staffing. And I just think it's really difficult to, that has been the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I suppose, so I fully agree with that point, but I also kind of wonder, since we're talking about partnerships, I suppose we all come with the belief that no one player can do it all. And to the extent you think that governments and donors are part of the long-term equation of sustainability or important for regulatory enablement of these services and so forth, I guess I still see that there's the business models are a challenge, but I think also just basic coordination around all these three types of players is just really difficult. I'm not sure exactly how to overcome that, but we do all have different objectives, motivations. It's hard work.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And three things that come to mind. First, address market failure through business rigor. And I also think this is a lot to do with changing behavior. There are many things that we can do online now, but we still don't. We still prefer to do things offline. So I think for us to scale, particularly in rural areas where people have a fear of sometimes technology or something that they're unfamiliar with, we've often realized that everything's perfect, but people just don't want to use it because they're still comfortable physically sitting in front of a doctor and being able to get that comfort. So I think behavior change, how you trigger that, how you enable that, is perhaps something we will discuss and learn more from each other over the next couple of days. But I think while we address as a business, we look for market failure. We say, here's an opportunity. We go in with the technology and the business rigor that you would apply to conventional business. And then you ask the question, how do I change fundamentally behavior? And that's where we probably don't do very well as MNOs. And we need a wider community to sort of work with us to drive that behavior change.
Hi, my name is Chrissy Merton. I work for a nonprofit called MEDA based in Washington, D.C. And my question is, I think, a little more specific, but still on the partnership theme. So both in my work at MEDA and the development point of view, and also previously working for an MNO, I've noticed that one of the biggest practical challenges in partnerships is the different funding cycles. So the private sector usually budgets in advance. They can spend money fairly quickly, and when they want to get something done, it kind of happens. Whereas the development sector tends to have longer planning cycles. Sometimes grants don't go through as quickly as we want them to. And it can create some real challenges in terms of planning and partnerships. And I was just wondering if maybe from your different perspectives and experiences, if you could speak to that.
We also sometimes face government shutdowns, which can throw things off a lot too. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. Yeah, it's really challenging. I mean, I think actually, it's interesting having joined USAID only 4 years ago. We talk about that, but actually the budget planning process is years and years and years in advance, and we do fund long-term projects. So, I guess I feel like there's ways in which for us to get money out the door quickly, and for us to, we've been building up a central budget for IT and innovations and so forth. It's not seamless by any means, but I think we're fortunate right now, at least from a USAID perspective, to have more central resources for this and more flexibility now granted to support startups and new ventures. But you're right, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult.
Any other comments? I think we've got a couple more questions.
Hi there, I'm Anna Gerard. Is this working? From Sightsavers, a UK headquartered NGO, but operating in about 36 countries. I just wanted to pick up also on the partnership point. Apologies, there's now 3 of us. But I have kind of the reverse issue to lady there, in that Sightsavers is going to be investing in kind of multi-country scaled M-health approaches from yesterday, basically. So within the next 18 months or so, we'll see quite a lot of investment in primary healthcare facilities across many countries in Africa, with the primary goal of eliminating a disease by 2020. So kind of our train of eliminating the disease has moved. We've got massive amounts of funding available for this, and we're quite clear on our objectives, and our partners' objectives are aligned completely. But we work in partnership with obviously a lot of players, ministries of health, INGOs, grassroots organisations. That's our bread and butter. We know how to do that. And we want to work in partnership with others, particularly MOs. But, you know, our train, as I said, has left the station. We have to implement today to eliminate the disease. So how, in your opinion, do you think you can come to the table, create a valuable partnership, and a partnership where there is a good level of trust and understanding in a timescale of, you know, 2 months? I mean, how is that possible? And how can we bring in the economic KPIs within our social KPIs right now? I mean, and it's a very challenging issue, but probably quite different from other NGOs in that the funding is there, so we're not looking for that.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, in that particular situation, is looking for very discrete, short-term opportunities for those partnerships. If you need to be able to create, you know, trust and progress forward in such a short period of time, make them very short engagements and build that trust from one mini engagement to another. Don't overplan. There you go. Excellent.
Hi, my name's Tim Murdoch from Cambridge University. Despite my academic credentials, I actually want to challenge. We've had a lot of conversations about partnerships and ecosystems and gathering together and making joint agreements. My experience is completely the reverse, I'm sorry. It's very entrepreneurial, it's very messy, very bottom-up driven, and I wonder what your view is on that.
Sorry, it being M4D in general?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we were having this conversation this morning about what are the most successful partnerships that we've seen in M4D, and we all kind of sat there going, you know, it's really actually very hard to see forged partnerships resulting in scaled solutions for all the reasons we've talked about. And in some ways, there are incredible M4D services like M-Pesa that are directly driven by the operator, and therefore, probably a huge reason it scaled is because they were so motivated. And then you see other M4D solutions coming out where it's partners who are, things like DMIS data or whatever that are, using the technology but almost bypassing MNOs, and they're super motivated because they don't have to forge partnerships. It's the things in the middle where you have NGOs trying to negotiate USSD codes, or whatever, and where these partnerships actually get really messy, and it's much, much harder. And we're seeing, I almost feel like it is easier on one end of the spectrum where there's a clear owner, they're really motivated, they see the profit in it, they don't have to take the time to build partnerships, and those things are working. It's the many other examples that kind of are in between that aren't. That it's just hard, and we need to figure out, I think we do have to figure out how to make that interface between the development community and the operator community much more seamless.
And that's what we're partly trying to achieve today by bringing people together in the rooms. And we've got a networking break to do just that, to forge connections between the people here today. And as we go to the networking break, I'd like to thank my panelists very much. Thank you to all the people who are asking questions. Please continue the discussions outside in the networking break. Remember to check the results of the Supertel poll, which was to do with the importance of partnerships. What do you think? Go find out what the people in the room thought, and check the screens out for the next question as well. Thanks very much.